The saloon doors slammed open with a force that rattled every whiskey glass on the counter, and the music died like a strangled bird. Cards froze midair, laughter caught in throats, and the slow haze of smoke seemed to hold its breath. All eyes turned to the man standing in the doorway, broad shoulders filling the frame, dust swirling in around his boots. "I need a bride tonight," he said, his voice low but cutting, like a knife drawn across a whetstone. For a moment, the only sound in Coldwater's lone saloon was the creak of the ceiling fan and the faint rattle of the desert wind outside. Even the piano player's hands hung above the keys, stiff and trembling. Men glanced at each other, uneasy grins tugging at their mouths, unsure whether to laugh or keep still. They all knew the man who had just walked in, Kael Redhawk. Half-blood warrior. Gunfighter. A man carved from the hard desert itself, raised between the dust and the flame, between two nations at war with one another. He was known for never begging, never yielding, never asking. Yet here he was, standing before them all, making a demand that was not just strange, it was dangerous. At the corner of the saloon, in the shadow where candlelight barely reached, Clara May stiffened. Her fingers clutched the rim of her chipped glass, the whiskey inside flat and warm. Her lace dress, once cream, now faded into a tired yellow hung loose on her frame. Men had looked at her for years, but never like this. Never with the weight that Kael's gray eyes carried as they swept the room, landing on her like a hawk sighting prey. Clara May was no stranger to stares. She had been a saloon woman too. Long, her reputation a tarnished badge she carried in silence. In Coldwater, men bought her smiles, her laughter, and sometimes more, depending on the night and the coin. Women whispered behind her back. Mothers pulled their daughters away when she walked the street. She had learned to wear her shame like a second skin, to act as if none of it touched her, though it had already eaten her hollow from the inside out. But when Kael Redhawk looked at her, she felt something crack. His stare wasn't hungry, wasn't mocking, it was something sharper, more dangerous. As if he didn't just see her face or the woman she had been forced to become. He saw through her. And she hated him for it. Hated him for the way her heart began to pound as though remembering it was alive. The room grew tense, the silence thick. Then Kael stepped forward. His boots struck the floorboards, heavy and certain, each step making the glasses on the table shiver. He carried himself with the calmness of a storm long before it breaks quiet, but ready to tear the earth apart. "You'll be my wife before the sun rises," Kael said, his voice directed at Clara now, steady and cold. A few men chuckled, their laughter too loud, too forced. One of the card players spat tobacco into the corner and muttered, "Ain't no preacher fool enough to marry you two before dawn." Kael's head turned, slow as an executioner's blade. The man who had spoken shifted in his seat, the color draining from his face. No one else dared to comment. Clara's breath came shallow. She wanted to laugh in Kael's face, to tell him he was mad, that she was not the kind of woman men married. That ship had sailed long ago, leaving her behind in a desert of shame and survival. Her lips parted, but instead of defiance, a broken whisper escaped her. "Why me?" Kael bent down, lowering his face until she could see the scar that slashed across his cheekbone, the darkness in his eyes. She smelled the wild sage on his skin, the faint trace of gunpowder clinging to him like a shadow. His words were so quiet. She knew they were meant for her alone. "Because I need salvation before my enemies catch me," he said. "And you need salvation from yourself." Her chest clenched, heat crawling into her throat. His words were not a proposal, they were a sentence, and she felt it heavy on her shoulders. For years she had believed there was no redemption for a woman like her. Yet here was this man, a warrior whose hands had spilled blood, declaring she could be saved. Before she could respond, the ground outside trembled. A horse screamed in the night, its cry sharp as a blade. Then came the pounding of hooves, many of them, growing closer, echoing against the empty buildings of Coldwater like the drums of war. Kael's eyes hardened. He straightened, his hand resting near the worn grip of his revolver. Around the room, men leaned back, suddenly eager to distance themselves. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears as realization struck. Whoever was coming, they were coming for him. Time was running out. And with one reckless sentence, Kael Redhawk had already bound her fate to his. Kael's voice rolled through the smoky saloon, calm yet sharp, like the edge of a freshly honed blade. "You'll be my wife before the sun rises." The word struck Clara like a bullet. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. She thought she had misheard him, but the silence in the room told her otherwise. Every eye was on her now, piercing, mocking, waiting. Men who had once treated her as less than nothing suddenly leaned forward, hungry to see how far this madness would go. Her heart pounded in her throat. Her hands, trembling, released the glass, and it hit the table with a dull clink. She wanted to laugh, to scream, to spit in Kael Redhawk's face. Instead, her lips betrayed her with a whisper that escaped like a plea. "Why me?" Kael's gaze locked on hers, unwavering, storm-gray, and unflinching. He leaned closer, so near that the lamplight caught the faint scar running down his cheek. His voice dropped, low enough for only her to hear. "Because I need salvation before my enemies find me. And you," his eyes flicked over her, not with hunger, but with something deeper, something that burned right through her shame. "You need salvation from yourself." Clara's breath hitched. The words sank into her chest, heavy, cruel, unrelenting. She wanted to shove them away, to deny them. But part of her knew deep down in the hollow places she never spoke of that he was right. The room stirred uneasily, the weight of his words settling over them all. A gambler at the next table snorted, trying to cut the tension. "You can't just claim a bride like a sack of grain, Redhawk. Ain't no preacher here foolish enough to wed a warrior and a saloon girl." The insult lingered in the air, sharp as a slap. Clara's cheeks burned, shame choking her. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet anyone's gaze. But Kael turned his head slowly toward the man who had spoken. His expression didn't change, but the air around him shifted, dangerous and still, like a snake coiling before a strike. The gambler swallowed hard, his bravado fading. He looked away, muttering something under his breath, and the room fell silent once more. No one else dared to challenge Kael. Clara forced herself to meet his gaze again. "You don't know me," she said, her voice brittle but steady. "I know enough," Kael replied. His hand hovered near his belt, where the warm grip of his revolver rested like a loyal companion. "I know you've been broken by men who never saw your worth. I know you're drowning, and this town's letting you sink. And I know I don't have till sunrise to choose wrong." His words twisted in her chest. Nobody had ever spoken of her like that, not as if she was more than a stain, more than a mistake. She wanted to deny it, to call him a liar, but the tremble in her hands betrayed the war inside her. Then came the sound. Outside, the pounding of hooves shook the ground, each thud growing louder, closer. A horse screamed, high and wild. Men inside. The saloon shifted nervously, eyes darting toward the doors. Shadows flickered across the windows, torches weaving like restless ghosts in the night. Clara's stomach dropped. Whoever they were coming fast, and they weren't friendly. Kael's hand tightened on his revolver. His gaze never left hers. "You'll walk out of here with me," he said, his voice low, commanding. "Or you'll stay, and when they come through those doors, you'll be nothing but a pawn in their fury." Clara's throat went dry. Her mind screamed at her to refuse, to push him away, to cling to the only life she knew, however broken it was. But her body betrayed her again. Her legs trembled, ready to move. ready to follow. The saloon doors rattled under the force of the wind, or perhaps under the pressure of the riders outside. Kael straightened to his full height, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. His long hair shifted in the draft, his chest bare under the lamplight, tribal jewelry glinting faintly. "Decide," he said simply. Clara's lips parted, her heart thundering in her chest. Around them, the other patrons leaned in, the weight of anticipation so thick it was suffocating. And as the first torchlight flashed through the window, painting the saloon in ghostly orange, Clara May realized her life would never again be her own. The moment Clara May's hand brushed Kael's, the saloon seemed to shatter around them. A crash of hooves outside, the bellow of a man's voice calling for blood, and then the saloon doors burst inward under the weight of the desert wind. Kael didn't hesitate. His arm was iron around Clara's waist, pulling her to her feet so suddenly her chair toppled back with a clatter. A single shout rose from the doorway, followed by the glint of steel and torchlight. The first gunshot split the air. Kael moved like lightning, shoving Clara behind him as his revolver cleared leather. One shot cracked, then another, echoing through the rafters, sending gamblers diving for cover and saloon girls shrieking. Clara's ears rang, the acrid bite of gunpowder stinging her throat. She didn't know whether to scream or pray. But Kael didn't wait to see if his bullets had landed true. He pulled her toward the back, his grip unrelenting. They crashed through the kitchen, past pots and pans rattling on hooks, the startled cook flattening himself against the wall. Out the back door and into the alley they ran, the chill of desert night slapping Clara's cheeks as the sound of more hoofbeats thundered closer. Kael whistled sharp and low. Out of the shadows, his warhorse charged forward, a massive black stallion with eyes like coals and muscles rippling under the moonlight. He swung Clara into the saddle with a strength that left her breathless, then vaulted up behind her in one motion, his chest hard against her back. "Hold tight," he growled. The stallion surged forward, hooves striking sparks on stone, and they burst out of the alley and into the open desert. Torches flared behind them as riders gave chase, their shouts slicing through the night air. Bullets whined past Clara's ears, one splintering wood as they cleared the last fence post out of cold water. She buried her face against Kael's chest, his skin hot, his heartbeat steady despite the chaos. The desert spread out before them, vast and merciless. The moon hung low, silvering the sagebrush and turning the dry riverbeds into ghostly trails. Wind ripped through Clara's hair, tears streaming from the sting of speed and sand. Every sound felt sharpened, the relentless pounding of hooves, the crack of rifles, the whistle of bullets skimming past. Her mind reeled. What was happening? Only an hour ago, she had been sitting in the saloon, drinking stale whiskey, resigned to the life she had chosen, or rather, the life that had chosen her. And now? She was a fugitive bride clinging to the back of a warrior she barely knew, riding into darkness with death clawing at their heels. "Why are you dragging me into this?" she shouted over the roar of the wind. Kael's chest pressed harder against her back as he leaned close, his voice thundering in her ear. "Because salvation don't come quiet, it comes riding through fire." The words shook her, though she barely understood them. Her arms tightened around him instinctively, and her heart hammered like a drum against her ribs. For the first time in years, she wasn't numb. She wasn't waiting for another day to pass her by in the same stale haze. She was alive, terrified, furious, breathless, but alive. Behind them, the riders closed in. Clara dared a glance over her shoulder. Shadows wove through the desert brush, torches flaring, gun barrels gleaming. She saw the twisted grins of men, hungry for blood, men who would kill Kael without hesitation, and likely her too, just for being at his side. The stallion snorted, foam flecking its mouth as it tore across the land. Kael leaned low, urging it faster, guiding it through gullies and over ridges with the instinct of a man born to the saddle. Clara felt the raw power beneath her, the earth trembling with every stride, the desert wind screaming past her ears. A shot cracked close too close. The bullet grazed the leather saddle horn, sending splinters flying into her cheek. She gasped, her hands gripping Kael's forearms until her nails dug deep into his skin. He didn't flinch. "Keep your eyes forward," he commanded. "Fear'll blind you quicker than bullets." She obeyed, though her body trembled uncontrollably. The desert stretched endless ahead of them, but for the first time she realized Kael wasn't just fleeing. He was leading them somewhere. Every turn, every ridge they crested seemed deliberate. He wasn't running blind, he was running with purpose. Clara wanted to ask where, but the words died on her tongue. Deep down she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The riders' shouts grew fainter behind them, but the chase wasn't over. Clara knew it. She could feel it in the tension coiled in Kael's muscles, in the way his hand never strayed far from the second revolver strapped to his thigh. They weren't safe, not yet. The desert night pressed in, vast and merciless. And Clara May, for the first time since she could remember, wasn't wishing it away. She was fighting, clinging, desperate to see what came next. For the first time, she wanted to live. By nightfall, the desert had swallowed the sound of pursuit. The stallion slowed, its sides heaving, nostrils flaring white in the moonlight. Clara could feel Kael's chest rising and falling against her back, the steady thunder of his heart finally softening. Her own lungs burned, her hair damp with sweat, her body trembling from the hours of relentless flight. They crested a rocky rise and descended into a canyon where water rushed wild and cold. The river cut like a silver blade through the darkness, its surface catching the stars, reflecting them like scattered diamonds. Kael reined the stallion to the bank, then swung down with practiced ease, the beads and bone of his tribal jewelry clicking softly in the night air. "Down," he said simply, his voice rough from the ride. Clara slid from the saddle, her legs buckling when her bare feet touched the soft, wet earth. She stumbled, catching herself on a willow branch, the chill of the river mist seeping into her bones. She was exhausted, hollow, and yet her mind refused to stop racing. "Why here?" she asked, her voice low. Kael knelt at the water's edge, scooping handfuls of the icy current over his face, washing away the streaks of sweat and blood. The moonlight gleamed against his bronzed skin, every muscle carved in harsh shadow. He didn't look at her when he answered, because water hides tracks. "By morning, they won't know which way we rode." Clara sank to her knees in the sand, her skirts heavy with dust. She hugged herself tightly, shivering though the night air wasn't cold. "You don't even know me," she said, bitterness coating her tongue. "You don't know what I've done, what I am." Kael lifted his head. The river's roar filled the silence between them, but his eyes found hers, steady and unwavering. "I know enough," her throat tightened. "Enough." "To know what? That I'm ruined? That men paid to touch me? That no church bell will ever ring for me?" The words spilled out sharp and venomous, but underneath them trembled years of quiet despair. Kael rose slowly, the water streaming down his chest, his long black hair slick against his shoulders. He crossed the short distance between them, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. For a moment, she thought he would strike her, or worse, pity her. Instead, he crouched before her, his hand lifting gently to her wrist. His thumb brushed over the faint bruises left by a drunkard's grip, marks she had long ago stopped noticing. His touch was light, reverent even, as though he feared she might break beneath it. "I know men broke you," he said, his voice low, roughened with something that was not anger but sorrow. I know this town fed on you until you forgot you were worth more than coin. I know you carry shame that was never yours to bear." Clara turned her face away, tears burning her eyes. "And you?" she whispered. "You think marrying me makes you righteous?" Kael's jaw tightened, his gaze dark as the canyon itself. "No, it makes me human again." The words struck her harder than any insult. For years she had seen herself only as a stain, a fallen woman beyond redemption. But here was a warrior, blood on his hands, hunted by men who wanted him dead, and still he spoke as if binding his life to hers might bring him salvation. She shook her head, her voice breaking. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking," Kael said. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers, the warmth of his breath mixing with the cool river air. "I'm asking you to stand, to stop drowning in their lies, to believe you're worth saving." Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the rawness of his words. For so long she had buried her longing for more beneath layers of whiskey, laughter, and survival. She had convinced herself there was no way out, no future beyond the saloon walls. But now, in the shadow of Redhawk's gaze, something stirred deep within her. Something she thought had long since died. Hope. The river roared beside them, carrying its secrets downstream, unseen and unspoken. Clara pressed her hand to her chest as if to steady the fragile spark igniting there. She didn't know if Kael was right. She didn't know if she deserved salvation, but for the first time she wanted to believe. The dawn came slowly, bleeding over the jagged canyon walls, painting the desert in streaks of amber and rose. Clara sat with her knees drawn up, wrapped in the warrior's heavy horse blanket. The weight of it was comforting, but more than that. It carried his scent, smoke, leather, and something raw and wild, like the earth itself. She told herself not to care. Men had taken everything from her before. Yet here she was, huddled in his shelter, her heart beating in rhythm with the sound of the river and his steady breathing. He had not slept all through the night. He had sat cross-legged beside the small fire, his eyes scanning the canyon mouth, the rifle laid across his knees. Shirtless, his skin gleamed bronze in the glow, shadows dancing across the ridges of muscle and the beads of turquoise and bone hanging against his chest. His long black hair caught the light like ink and flame. Clara watched him in silence, trying to decide what he was, protector or captor, savior or destroyer. Finally, she spoke. "You haven't said why." "Why me?" The warrior didn't look at her right away. His jaw clenched, as though the words were buried in stone. Then his voice came low, rough as gravel, yet steady. "My people believe every soul walks two roads. One is life, one is death. I was walking the second, until I saw you." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to laugh at the madness of it. She wanted to scream that she wasn't anyone's salvation. She was a broken woman with whiskey-stained lips and too many ghosts in her past. But the way he said it, as though the words were carved into his very bones, silenced her. "You need a bride," she whispered, remembering the wild declaration he had made in the saloon. "And you think that's me?" At last he turned to face her fully. His gray eyes, stormy and unyielding, met hers. "I do not think, I know. You are fallen, yes. But fallen things can rise again. I need your hand to rise with me." Clara's hands trembled in her lap. No man had ever looked at her that way before, not with hunger, not with scorn, not with pity, but with belief. Fierce, unshakable belief. It terrified her. Before she could answer, the stallion whickered low, ears flicking. The warrior stiffened. His head lifted, sharp as a hawk's. Then she heard it too, the faint echo of voices bouncing down the canyon walls, the crunch of boots on gravel. "They found us," Clara breathed. The warrior was already moving, rising with fluid grace, the rifle swinging across his shoulder. His hair caught the dawnlight as he scanned the ridgeline. His muscles tightened, and she saw the beast inside him stir the wild defender, ready to strike. He crouched low, whispering something in his language, words Clara didn't understand but felt vibrate in her bones. Then he pointed to the narrow cut of stone leading deeper into the canyon. "Ride now." "I can't," she started, but his hand gripped hers, strong and unyielding. He pressed the reins into her palm, lifting her onto the stallion's back as though she weighed nothing. His fingers lingered at her waist, steadying her. "Do not look back," he said, voice like steel, and then he was gone, fading into the rocks like a shadow, rifle in hand. Clara clutched the reins, her heart pounding, torn between obeying and staying. She had never run for anyone before, not for the men who paid for her, not for the sheriffs who scorned her. Yet this warrior had given her something she hadn't known she still possessed, the belief that she could be more than the ruins of her past. The gunshot cracked the dawn wide open. Clara gasped, jerking the reins as the stallion reared. Smoke curled from the ridge above, and voices shouted. But over it all, she saw him standing against the rising sun, his chest bare and marked with scars, long hair streaming, tribal beads glinting like fire. He looked like a spirit born of the earth, defying death itself. Her breath caught. For the first time in years, Clara prayed, not for herself. For him. And with that prayer burning in her chest, she spurred the stallion forward into the canyon, leaving the roar of battle behind. But her heart stayed with the warrior who had claimed she was his salvation. The wind gusted through Red Mesa, carrying the smell of dust, smoke, and gunpowder. Clara held tightly to the reins as Kael's stallion galloped into the open desert plain, muscles rippling under his powerful frame. The first hints of dawn lit the horizon, turning the rocks into blazing gold and red, painting a cinematic backdrop for what was about to become a battle. Kael's eyes narrowed. The riders behind them were relentless, their shadows stretching across the sagebrush. Men with rifles, pistols, and torches had been hunting them since the night before. Kael's jaw clenched, his mind calculating every ridge, every boulder, every possible advantage. Clara could feel the tension coiled in him, a taut wire ready to snap. "Stay close," he growled, voice low but sharp. "And don't make a sound until I tell you." She pressed herself against his back, heart hammering. Every nerve in her body screamed fear, yet her hands moved to steady herself, ready to act if needed. She had never fought for her life like this, and for the first time, she realized she was not merely surviving. She was living with intent. They reached a natural choke point between two mesas. Kael slid from the saddle and crouched behind a boulder, gesturing for Clara to follow. The moment she landed on the sand, he had already pulled his revolver free. His chest was bare under the morning sun, bronze and scarred, muscles coiled like springs. His long black hair shifted with the wind, tribal beads catching the early light. The pursuers reached the ridge above them, shouting, guns raised. Kael fired first, a single shot ringing out across the desert. One man fell, another ducked behind a boulder. The dust and sand exploded under the hooves of their horses as Kael moved with precision. A predator in his element. Clara froze for a moment, then realized he had loaded her with purpose. A rifle rested nearby, within reach. Hesitantly, she picked it up. Kael's eyes met hers, gray and stormy, and he nodded. "You're ready." The first rider leaned too far over his saddle, and Clara fired. The rifle cracked, smoke curling around her fingers. The man tumbled sideways from his horse, and a thrill, sharp and terrifying, ran through her chest. She was not the same woman who had stumbled into the saloon the night before. Kael didn't pause. He moved from boulder to boulder, revolvers flashing, each shot precise. His war cries rose and fell with the echoes of the canyon walls. The dust whipped around them, mingling with the metallic scent of blood, sweat, and gunpowder. Every sound was amplified: the stomp of hooves, the snap of a rifle, the whine of bullets slicing the air. Clara's hand shook, but she steadied her aim, her eyes finding the next target. Another shot, another man down. Kael's movements were fluid, deadly, almost ceremonial, each motion honed by years of survival and battle. His tribal jewelry clinked with every twist, a rhythm to the chaos around them. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. When the sun finally broke fully over the horizon, Red Mesa was quiet. The remaining riders had fled, leaving behind broken weapons, spent shells, and the echoes of their defeat. Kael stood atop a boulder, chest rising and falling, rifle in hand, hair streaming in the wind. His eyes scanned the horizon, ensuring no one remained to follow. Clara dropped the rifle, trembling, her legs weak. She had never felt so alive, so terrified, so empowered all at once. The warrior descended from his perch and crossed to her. He knelt, brushing sand from her shoulder, his hand lingering just long enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin. "Fought well," he said simply. "Better than most men who have lived their whole lives in battle." Her lips trembled, and she let out a shaky laugh. I didn't know I could." Kael's gray eyes softened. "Neither did I," he admitted, brushing a strand of dust-covered hair from her face. "But tonight you did." For the first time, Clara saw the man beneath the warrior, the protector, the fighter, the man who had carried her from a saloon and given her something more than survival, a chance at redemption. The desert stretched endlessly before them, silent, now except for the whispering wind and the distant rush of the river they had left behind. Clara knew that the danger wasn't fully gone, but for the first time she felt hope. Not the fragile hope she had carried in her chest for years, but the kind forged in fire, blood, and trust. And in that moment, she understood something she had never admitted. She would follow Kael Redhawk anywhere, through the desert, into battle, into the unknown. The sun hung low over the horizon, setting the desert ablaze in streaks of gold, crimson, and purple. The dust from the battle at Red Mesa had settled, leaving the ground littered with spent shells, broken weapons, and hoof prints that traced the path of their fight. Clara May sat on the edge of the canyon, her hands still shaking, her body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Kael Redhawk approached, shirtless, bronzed skin gleaming in the last light of day. His long black hair caught the glow of sunset, beads and bones glinting with every step. He looked like a figure carved from the earth itself, strong, unyielding, and magnificent. Clara's gaze followed him, and for a moment she forgot the danger, the fear, the long nights of survival. "Are they gone?" she asked, voice weak but steady. Kael scanned the horizon one last time, gray eyes shadowed with wariness. Then he let out a long breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. "For now, you're safe." Clara's chest heaved, relief and disbelief warring inside her. Safe, a word she had not allowed herself to whisper in years. She dared not believe it fully, not until the last gunshot echoed, fading into silence. Kael knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You fought well," he said, voice quiet now, no longer commanding but soft, like wind over desert stone. "Braver than most men I've known." Clara looked down, brushing sand from her dress, tears mingling with sweat. I didn't. "No, I had it in me," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought I was done, that my life was only about surviving." "You're more than survival," Kael said, eyes locking with hers. "You're alive. And alive means you can fight, love, and reclaim what was taken from you." The words struck her, heavy yet freeing. She felt the weight of years, the shame, the loneliness, the endless nights of hiding lift slightly carried away on the desert wind. Kael had not just fought for her body, he had fought for her soul, her chance to rise from the ruins of the life she had endured. Clara dared to lift her gaze fully, meeting the storm-gray eyes of the warrior who had claimed her fate and given her hope. For a moment, silence enveloped them, thick and intimate, as if the world itself had paused. She saw not just the fighter, but the man beneath the protector, the human, scarred and steadfast, who had taken her from the brink and offered her something she hadn't dared to dream of: salvation. "You're more than you know," he murmured, "and I need you by my side. Not just tonight, not just in survival, but in what comes next." Her lips trembled. The desert wind whispered through the canyons, carrying the scent of sage and dust. For so long she had believed she was irredeemable, but here was proof that even the fallen could rise. The warrior's hand found hers, fingers lacing naturally, grounding her, connecting them in the unspoken bond of trust and courage. Clara exhaled, letting the tension drain. "Then I will stand with you," she whispered, "through whatever comes next." A faint smile curved Kael's lips, a rare, fleeting softness. He rose, brushing sand from his chest, the beads and bones of his jewelry clinking gently. Together, they walked toward the edge of the mesa, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting them in gold and crimson. The desert stretched endlessly before them, wild and untamed, but for the first time, Clara didn't feel lost. She felt ready. Ready to live, ready to fight, ready to be more than what the world had labeled her. Kael lifted her onto the stallion first, then mounted behind her. The wind whipped through their hair, the horse's hooves stirring the dust in clouds that shimmered like fire. They rode into the fading light, two figures carved from the desert itself, strong, unbroken, and bound by something fiercer than fear or fate: hope, trust, and the promise of a future built together died as the last light vanished behind the mesas. Clara leaned against Kael's chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his presence and the sound of the desert wind fill her senses. She had survived the night, the hunters, the darkness within herself. And now at last she understood that salvation could come in the form of a warrior's hand, offered not as possession, but as trust. Together they rode toward the unknown, the desert alive with possibility, and Clara May finally believed she was not falling anymore. She was rising.